Emma, this isn't working, Julian said, stopping mid-stride to face her directly. Emma blinked once. The expense report? I already sent it and corrected the accounting error from last quarter. Julian waved his hand dismissively, cutting her off before she could continue. No, not the work. The work is fine. Actually, it's better than fine. The problem is you. You're too quiet. It's weird. I walk into a room and I don't even know if you're there. You're like a ghost. I need energy in this office. I need lions, not library mice. Emma pressed the tablet tighter against her body. She knew she carried the entire operation on her shoulders. She knew Julian would be lost without her meticulous organization, her flawless execution, her ability to anticipate problems before they became disasters. But she didn't argue. She never argued.
You're fired, Julian continued, his tone casual, as if he were ordering lunch. Pack your things. No drama. Oh, and leave the company tablet. Emma's voice remained steady, almost eerily calm. That's fine, Julian. I'll leave the tablet. But I think you forgot that the voice memo function automatically syncs to the cloud and to the contact list. Julian laughed, a sharp, dismissive bark of amusement. He didn't understand the threat. He didn't even register it as a threat. Bye, little ghost. Close the door on your way out. Julian Matthews had just fired the only person who knew where all the bodies were buried. He thought her silence was weakness. He had no idea she'd been quiet because she was busy pressing record. 3 years earlier, Emma Clark had walked into Julian Matthews' talent agency with a degree in communications and a desperate need for rent money.
The position was advertised as Executive Assistant to Premier Talent Agent, which sounded impressive until you realized it meant you were basically a glorified servant to a man who treated people like disposable coffee cups. But the pay was good, the benefits were better, and Emma needed both. So she took the job, and she did it well. Better than well. She did it perfectly. Julian Matthews was a talent agent for the elite. Athletes, actors, influencers, luxury brand executives, anyone with money and a need for representation. He sold dreams. He sold access. He sold the illusion that he cared about his clients as if they were family. And he was phenomenal at it. On the phone, Julian was pure charisma. He could convince a struggling actor they were one audition away from stardom. He could make a washed-up athlete believe they still had endorsement potential.
He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to make people feel special, valued, irreplaceable. But the moment he hung up the phone, the mask came off. Emma learned this within her first week. She'd been sitting in the corner of Julian's office, quietly organizing his calendar on her laptop when he finished a call with Marcus Chen, a professional soccer player who just signed a major contract with a European team. Julian had been gushing, practically singing Marcus's praises. You're a legend, man. Absolutely unstoppable. This $10 million deal is just the beginning. You're irreplaceable, brother. Love you. The moment the call ended, Julian tossed his phone onto the desk and rolled his eyes so hard, Emma was surprised they didn't fall out of his head. God, what an idiot, Julian muttered to the empty room, not even bothering to check if Emma was listening.
The guy can barely read and he wants 10 million? He's a horse that kicks a ball. The second I get my commission, I'm dropping this moron. Emma, you got that meeting noted down? Emma had looked up from her laptop, her face carefully blank. Noted, sir. But she wasn't just taking notes. She'd opened the voice memo app on her phone, hidden discreetly beside her keyboard. The audio spectrum danced across the screen, capturing every syllable, every insult, every casual betrayal. Emma had started recording Julian's private comments almost accidentally. She'd needed to remember specific details from a meeting, and Julian spoke so fast that taking written notes was nearly impossible, so she'd started recording. And then she'd noticed the pattern, the Jekyll and Hyde routine, the saint on the phone, the devil in private. So she kept recording. Not every day, not every conversation, but the important ones. The ones where Julian revealed his true thoughts about the people who trusted him with their careers, their reputations, their livelihoods. There was the call with Victoria Lang, an actress in her late 40s who'd been with Julian's agency for over a decade. Julian had spent 20 minutes on the phone with her, reassuring her that age was just a number, that Hollywood was finally embracing mature talent, that her next role would be her comeback. The moment he hung up, he turned to Emma with a smirk. She's done, washed up.
We're going to milk whatever money's left in her contracts and then cut her loose before people realize she's ancient. Emma, draft a termination letter template. We'll need it in 6 months. Emma's finger had been on the record button. The red dot pulsed quietly in the corner of her screen.
Then there was Richard Pemberton, a 70-year-old investor who'd partnered with Julian's agency to fund emerging talent. Richard was old school, a gentleman, the kind of man who still wore three-piece suits and called women ma'am. Julian treated him like royalty to his face, thanking him profusely for his vision and generosity. Behind closed doors, Julian laughed about him. The old man's senile. I've been skimming 5% off the top of his investments, and he hasn't noticed a thing. By the time he figures it out, I'll be in the Bahamas. The recording app captured it all. There was the luxury watch brand that paid Julian's agency a 6-figure retainer to represent them. Julian had praised their craftsmanship, their heritage, their commitment to excellence. In private, he called them overpriced garbage for people with more money than sense.
There was the social media influencer who'd built her entire career on body positivity and self-love. Julian represented her, took his 20%, and then told his colleagues she was a whale who convinced other whales to buy shapewear. Emma heard it all. She was always there, standing quietly in the corner, tablet in hand, expression neutral. Julian had grown so accustomed to her presence that he forgot she was even human. She was furniture, a lamp, a potted plant, something that existed in the room but didn't matter. And because she didn't matter, Julian spoke freely. No filter, no fear, no consequences. Until the day he decided she was too quiet. Emma had never been a loud person. Even as a child, she'd been the one who observed rather than participated, who listened rather than spoke. It wasn't shyness exactly. It was more like efficiency. Why waste words when silence could teach you so much more? In Julian's office, her quietness had been an asset. She heard things. She learned things. She understood the game in ways that louder, flashier assistants never could. But Julian didn't see it that way. To him, Emma's silence was a defect, a personality flaw, an irritation that had been building for months, until finally, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, he snapped. He'd just lost a major award, some industry recognition he'd been counting on to boost his profile. He was in a foul mood, looking for someone to blame, someone to punish. Emma happened to be standing there, quietly reviewing his schedule for the next day, and that was enough. "Why don't you ever say anything?" Julian had suddenly demanded, whirling on her with unexpected venom. "Your complete lack of personality is driving me insane. You're fired. Get out." Emma had packed her small box of personal items, a framed photo of her parents, a coffee mug, a succulent plant that had somehow survived 3 years in Julian's fluorescent-lit office. Julian had already left for a celebratory lunch, some kind of consolation meal with colleagues who would tell him he deserved the award anyway. The office was empty. Emma sat down at her desk one last time. She opened the company email system, created a new message. In the to field, she entered the distribution list she'd been maintaining for 3 years. Every single VIP client, every board member, every business partner, every person who mattered to Julian's empire. The subject line was simple: final meeting notes, assistant transition. The body of the email was professional, courteous, efficient, just like Emma herself. Dear all, today marks my last day as Julian Matthews' executive assistant. Julian has decided to terminate my employment because I am, in his words, too quiet. As my final act of thoroughness, I have compiled a comprehensive audio file of Julian's unfiltered thoughts regarding each of you, so that the next assistant will have proper context for managing these important relationships. It has been a privilege to serve you all. Best regards, Emma Clark. Attached to the email was a single MP3 file, 250 megabytes, 45 minutes of carefully curated audio clips, organized chronologically, labeled by client name. Emma had spent her lunch breaks over the past month editing it all together, a greatest hits compilation of Julian Matthews being Julian Matthews. Her finger hovered over the send button for exactly 3 seconds, not because she was hesitating,
but because she wanted to remember this moment. The moment when the quietest person in the room finally made some noise. She clicked send. The progress bar filled. The screen confirmed. Message sent to 83 recipients. Emma closed her laptop, picked up her box, and walked out of Julian Matthews' office for the last time. Julian was at Marcello's, an absurdly expensive Italian restaurant where the pasta cost more per plate than Emma's weekly grocery budget. He was with 2 other agents, laughing too loudly, drinking too much wine, complaining about the award committee's obvious bias and lack of taste. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Marcus Chen, the soccer player. Julian smiled, ready to pour on the charm. "Hey, champ, I knew you'd—" The scream that came through the phone was so loud that Julian had to pull it away from his ear. The other diners turned to look.
Marcus Chen was yelling, words pouring out in a furious torrent, accusations and threats and shock. Julian's smile evaporated. "What? What are you talking about? I never said that. Who told you I said that?" But Marcus had already hung up. Before Julian could even process what had happened, the phone rang again. Victoria Lang, the actress. Then Richard Pemberton, the investor. Then the luxury watch brand CEO. Then the body-positive influencer's manager. The calls came in waves, one after another. Angry voices demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, severing contracts. Julian's email notification count was climbing. 15 new messages. 30. 50. He opened his inbox with shaking hands. The subject lines were variations on a theme. Contract terminated effective immediately. Legal action pending. You're done. He scrolled until he found Emma's email. Saw the attachment.
Clicked it with a sense of creeping dread. His own voice filled his earbuds, tinny but unmistakable. "The guy can barely read and he wants 10 million. He's a horse that kicks a ball." Julian felt his stomach drop into his shoes. He scrolled through the audio file. There were timestamps, labels. Marcus Chen, 03-15-2024. Victoria Lang, 06-22-2024. Richard Pemberton, 08-30-2024. It was all there. Every insult, every betrayal, every moment he thought he was safe because the only witness was a quiet girl who didn't matter. The agency that Julian Matthews had spent 15 years building collapsed in 45 minutes. That's how long it took for his entire client roster to abandon him. Nobody wants to work with an agent who despises them. Nobody trusts a representative who mocks them behind their backs.
Reputation is everything in the talent industry, and Julian's reputation had just been incinerated by an MP3 file. The calls from clients turned into calls from lawyers. The lawyers turned into lawsuits. Breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, defamation. Julian's business partners, the ones who'd been in the restaurant with him, quietly distanced themselves. His name became toxic overnight. Industry blogs picked up the story. Talent agents' secret recordings reveal shocking contempt for clients. The audio clips started circulating on social media, Julian's voice layered over memes and reaction videos. Within a week, Julian Matthews' agency was defunct. The office lease was terminated. The staff was let go. Julian's personal brand, the thing he'd valued more than anything, was obliterated. 2 months later, Julian stood in his empty office, packing his own belongings into cardboard boxes.
The phones had been disconnected. The furniture was being repossessed. The city view that had once seemed like a symbol of his success now felt like a taunt, a reminder of how far he'd fallen. His phone buzzed one last time. A news alert. Former assistant Emma Clark joins Marcus Chen's management team as director of operations. Julian clicked the link. There was a photo of Emma, standing beside Marcus Chen at some charity event, both of them smiling. The article praised Emma's integrity, her work ethic, her attention to detail. It mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd previously worked for disgraced agent Julian Matthews. Marcus Chen was quoted in the article. "Emma is the most professional, trustworthy person I've ever worked with. She proved that loyalty goes both ways. She had my back when my own agent was stabbing me in it." Julian stared at the photo.
Emma looked exactly the same. calm, composed, quiet. But now she was standing in a position of power, respected and valued, working for the very client Julian had called an idiot. Meanwhile, Emma sat in her new office, smaller than Julian's, but infinitely more peaceful, reviewing schedules and contracts with the same meticulous efficiency she'd always possessed. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She was still the quietest person in most rooms. But she'd learned something that Julian never understood. Silence isn't weakness. Observation isn't passivity. And sometimes the person who says the least is the one paying the most attention. Julian had wanted Emma to speak up, to be more assertive, to make her presence known. In the end, she didn't need to say a single word to destroy him. She just let his own voice do all the talking.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story from Money Stories That Matter, hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you real stories about money, power, and the consequences of treating people like they don't matter. Don't miss the next one. The aftermath of Julian's downfall rippled through the industry in ways nobody could have predicted. Other assistants, inspired by Emma's story, started speaking up about their own experiences with abusive bosses. Some agencies implemented new policies, ethics training, respect initiatives. It was a small change, but it was something. Emma never gave interviews about what happened. She didn't need to. The story told itself. And in the years that followed, she built a reputation, not as the woman who destroyed Julian Matthews, but as someone who understood that real power doesn't come from being the loudest voice in the room.
It comes from knowing when to listen and when to act. Julian tried to rebuild. He reached out to former contacts, attempted to rebrand, even considered changing his name and starting over in a different city. But the internet has a long memory, and the talent industry has an even longer one. Nobody would touch him. Nobody trusted him. He'd violated the most fundamental rule of his profession. Never, ever let your clients know what you really think of them. The last anyone heard, Julian was working in real estate in a small town in Nevada, far from the glass towers and city views he'd once commanded. He traded his Italian loafers for sensible shoes, his corner office for a desk in a strip mall, his roster of celebrity clients for first-time home buyers and retirees looking to downsize. Emma, meanwhile, thrived.
She expanded her role with Marcus Chen's team, eventually launching her own management consultancy focused on ethical representation and transparent business practices. She hired a small team of assistants, people she treated with respect, people whose opinions she valued, people who never had to wonder if she was insulting them the moment they left the room. She was still quiet, still observant, still the kind of person who could disappear into the background of a meeting if she wanted to. But now, people understood that her silence wasn't emptiness. It was strategy. It was intelligence. It was power held in reserve. The story of Julian and Emma became something of a legend in professional circles. Business schools used it as a case study in ethics and leadership. Management seminars referenced it when discussing respect in the workplace.
And every time a boss somewhere thought about dismissing a quiet employee, about mocking an assistant, about assuming that silence meant ignorance, someone would bring up the name Emma Clark and remind them what happened to the last person who made that mistake. Julian's biggest error wasn't firing Emma, it was underestimating her. He saw quietness and assumed incompetence. He saw observation and assumed passivity. He confused her professionalism for weakness and her discretion for ignorance. He thought that because she didn't command attention, she didn't deserve respect. He was wrong. The truth is, the people we overlook are often the ones who see us most clearly. The assistants, the support staff, the quiet professionals who keep the machine running while everyone else takes credit. They're not invisible because they're weak. They're invisible because we choose not to see them. And that choice, that casual dismissal of their humanity, their intelligence, their value, can have consequences we never see coming. Julian learned this lesson too late.
By the time he realized that Emma had been paying attention all along, that her silence had been a choice rather than a limitation, his entire world had already crumbled. The recordings she'd made weren't revenge. They were evidence. Evidence of who Julian really was when he thought nobody important was watching. If there's one takeaway from this story, it's this. Respect is not negotiable. It doesn't matter if someone works for you, reports to you, or serves you coffee every morning. Every person deserves basic human dignity. Every person deserves to be treated as if they matter, because they do matter.
And the moment you forget that, the moment you start treating people as if they're disposable, invisible, or beneath your consideration, you're setting yourself up for a fall. Emma didn't destroy Julian because she was vindictive or cruel. She destroyed him because he destroyed himself. Every word he spoke in that recording was his choice. Every insult, every betrayal, every casual act of disrespect. Emma just pressed record. Julian did the rest. So if you're watching this and you're someone who has power over others, someone who manages people, represents people, employs people, ask yourself this question. If someone recorded everything you said in private, would you still have a career? If your clients, your colleagues, your employees heard your unfiltered thoughts about them, would they still want to work with you? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to change what you're saying, or better yet, change what you're thinking. And if you're someone like Emma, someone who's been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated because you don't fit someone else's idea of what confidence looks like, remember this. Your quietness is not a weakness. Your observation is not passivity. The world needs people who listen more than they speak, who watch more than they perform, who understand that real power doesn't require volume. The walls have ears. They always have. The only difference now is that those ears come with recording devices. So, treat people well. Respect the quiet ones. Value the people who make your life easier, your work possible, your success achievable. Because the person you're dismissing today might be the person holding your future in their hands tomorrow. What do you think about Emma's decision?
Was she justified in sending those recordings, or did she go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and we love hearing different perspectives on these stories. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Money Stories That Matter. We bring you stories like this every week, real tales of power, money, consequences, and the human drama that unfolds when people forget that their actions have weight. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Julian Matthews thought he could say whatever he wanted because the only witness was someone he considered irrelevant. Emma Clark proved that relevance isn't determined by volume. Sometimes the most important person in the room is the one you're not paying attention to. And by the time you realize they've been listening all along, it's already too late.